Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 40. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Hello and welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard. It is the first of the month, the first Tuesday of the month, and you know what that means? Listener Q&A. So today's question comes from Marie, and she has several questions, actually. I'm going to try to summarize what's going on, but I think a lot of people will be able to benefit from this. So she is a clerk right now out of law school, and she's trying to decide whether or not she should be picky in what she's going to do next, right? So she's going to be looking at what jobs are available after the clerkship. And so she's wondering, does she need to make sure that the next job that she has, should it be aligned with her ultimate career goals? Or should she be more focused on just getting the best experience possible, just grinning and bearing it so that she can later be picky? So that's the first part of it. She also wants to know if she gets in the wrong job, how soon could she move out of that? So what does that look like from an employer standpoint? How often can you move around without it hurting your career opportunities? And then last, she wanted to know if you're working at a place that doesn't really value hardworking overachievers, how do you get them to notice that and appreciate that? So, like I said, we got a lot going on here, but they're all great questions. And even if you're not in a similar position, even if you're not a young associate, I think that all of these questions can still apply. And I think everyone's going to really get a lot out of this episode. But Marie, we're going to try to help you specifically. Okay, so let's break it down and get started with the question about whether or not you should be looking for a job that is aligned with your ultimate career goals, or if you should just be looking for the best experience possible for your resume down the road. So I do think if there is something very specific in mind that you think you want to do one day, certain titles or jobs that you want to hold, you should absolutely keep them in mind as you're looking for your next job. Now, that being said, you don't have to go straight for that job, right? Or something that looks like it's going to be the exact next step. Sometimes our careers are linear and logical, and other times they are not. That said, generally when they're not, it's because of connections and opportunities that present themselves. So if there's something that you know you want, it's a much smarter and strategic option to focus on what that path would look like. Now, you're not going to be able to predict this, but the more that you try to make sure it is aligned, that's going to help you out. So keep in mind that it does not have to be a straight path, but it needs to be a plausible path. So, for example, let's say that your ultimate goal is to be the general counsel of a Fortune 500 company. And as you're doing this clerkship, you apply for or you get an option, you get an opportunity to be a federal prosecutor. Now, being a federal prosecutor, well, one, it's great litigation experience, okay? So hands down, great litigation experience. But being a general counsel doesn't always require litigation experience. Generally, they like transactional more, although that's not always the rule. Again, you don't have to exclude anything. There are many ways to get somewhere, but if you're just looking at the logical path, litigation would not really be your strong suit. You're going to want to focus more on the transactional piece. And two, If you're a federal prosecutor, you might get hired to join a firm to do investigations type work, especially if it is, the white collar work or where companies are being investigated for certain regulations. If there's a Fortune 500 company out there where that's a really important part of what they do legally, maybe you would have a role to play there, but that's not a real straight path. And so it doesn't mean that that's not an amazing job or an amazing opportunity, but it doesn't make a ton of sense when you look at what your end goal is. That said, you may not want to go directly in-house either, right? So you might say, well, if I'm wanting to be general counsel of a certain company, I should try to get into that company as soon as possible. Some companies, it is homegrown and they definitely try to advance from within, but a lot of times a true general counsel comes from outside. And again, you cannot predict how your path will look, but if you look at general counsels in general, most of them had some kind of law firm experience first and foremost. Not always the case, but for the vast majority, that is the rule of thumb. So I have no idea what your ultimate career goal is, but I would look at what that is. And by the way, know that it can change. And if you change your mind, that's great. But if you have a strong knowing and a strong feeling now, there is nothing wrong with keeping your eye on that prize. So again, it doesn't have to be a straight path, but it needs to be a plausible path. It's simply going to make things much easier the more you progress in your career. And there is something to be said about the fact that if you get on a path that you do not like, the longer you stay on that path, the harder it is to change. Now, you have a law degree, so you can do most anything you want. But doing most anything you want, sometimes it requires risk. So, for example, let's say you're a commercial litigator at a large law firm, and you've been doing that for 10 or 15 years. And you decide you want to do tax work. That's probably not a good example because you probably need a little bit more of an advanced degree on that. Let's say you want to do healthcare regulatory work. You could go start your own firm doing that, but you're going to have a hard time convincing probably your firm to let you completely change career trajectories. And you're probably going to have a hard time going in-house to do something where you have no experience. Okay. So you want to be careful not to go too far down a path that is not your ultimate or end goal, because it may make it much, much harder to then get out of it. It doesn't mean you can't. You're just going to have more of a struggle and you're going to have to make harder decisions and it's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable for you. So absolutely keep this in mind. I often say, and some of my girlfriends, we joke, we wish someone had come into law school and explained to us, which practice groups are actually the most lucrative, both from the perspective of being a partner within a firm and going to companies if you want to be in-house. There absolutely are areas that are much more lucrative than others, and no one talks about that in law school. And there's some that have much better work-life balance. It looks a bit different than others, and no one talks about that in law school. So absolutely have in mind what you want. Keep that in mind. It's going to make it much easier if you stay on a plausible path. And just beware that some people, once they get on a path and they're making good money, especially with the golden handcuffs, or just because we're people pleasers, we're, just doing the work. And so, we're just trying to get through each day. And then sometimes, several years, maybe even a decade passes, and then you find yourself stuck. So that was a very long-winded way of saying, absolutely, I want you to keep your ultimate career goals in mind. I would not just take a job because it's a good opportunity if it's not aligned with what you ultimately want. I will tell you, when I was in law school, I knew that I wanted to do IP and entertainment work. And everyone kept telling me over and over again, if that's what I wanted to do, I needed to go be a good lawyer first. Just get the best law firm job I could get. And I knew in my gut, I knew in my heart that that was probably not correct. That's just what they were telling me. And so I went to a boutique firm because I thought in my gut, having experience in that area is going to be far more important than being a good lawyer when it comes to making any kind of lateral move. And I'm so glad that I listened to my gut on that, because I went to a boutique. I wasn't making nearly as much money as my friends. But I did IP work, I did entertainment work, and I got the experience. It's really hard in certain markets to start as a first year in those areas. And none of the big firms were looking for a first year in those areas. I spent 2 years at the boutique, and then I was able to lateral over into one of those positions at, the largest firm in Nashville at the time. And being a good lawyer would not have gotten me that position. They were looking for someone that had experience. Okay. So sometimes you just, I think keeping in mind what you truly want is far more important. And two, I think part of the moral of that story is trust your intuition and gut. If the advice I'm giving you does not feel right, you know for you what you need. So take advice, but if it feels wrong, trust your gut. You're probably going to be right about yourself. Okay. Let's move into the second part. And that is, how picky can you be? And should you just grin and bear it? Okay. So how picky should you be? Honestly, that depends on the market and opportunities and what you want. Okay. So the market right now is okay, depending on if you want to be in a certain city or not. That could impact whether or not it's going to be easier to get a certain job. Coming from a clerkship, it's probably going to be easier for you to go into a law firm, and maybe that's what you're wanting. I'm not sure, but that really is going to be dependent on the market you're looking to go into. If everyone around you is having a really hard time finding a job, you're probably not going to be able to be as picky. When I graduated, it was the heyday. We were able to really pick our jobs. It was an employee market. And I think it's right now we have a ton of lawyers. There's a ton of competition. So, but I really see it more as equal. There was a time when we were in the recession where, firms and companies had the upper hand. I feel like it's pretty neutral right now, but some of that's just going to depend on your skill set and what opportunities are around. If there are a ton of opportunities and you get to choose what you want, then absolutely be picky. If you only get one or two offers, then, maybe you just take what you can get, right? So I prefer that you be picky, but you may not have that chance. And so that may not really answer your question, but I think part of it is just a practical thing, and that depends on the market and, quite frankly, how marketable you are. When it comes to whether or not you should grin and bear it, right? Whether or not you should maybe join a company or firm that is not going to be the perfect fit, but you think it'll be great experience, you might want to do that, especially if it's part of this plausible path to your ultimate career goal. Now, I'm not the kind of person that's going to tell you that, you have to put in a certain amount of time and you've got to pay your dues in order to get what you want. Most baby boomers will disagree with me. And some of those probably at the higher end of the spectrum, the Gen Xers that are closer to the baby boomers, they're going to agree. And I will tell you, the longer someone has ever been in any kind of practice, they start to move towards that point of view, which is, well, I did it, so you need to do it too. I personally don't agree with that, but just know that others are going to absolutely have that point of view that you should grin and bear it. Here's my thing though. A lot of your early experiences in any career, it's really about learning. And you can only learn and you can only grow if you are all in. So to some degree, you are having to prove yourself. And it is totally frustrating because you feel like, you proved yourself in law school and then you're having to start over. From my perspective, it's not an initiation. It's not a, you have to put in your dues before you can do certain things. It's really more about being willing to say, I am a sponge and I am eager and I want to learn and I want to impress and I want to grow. That just is a sign and a signal to those around you and to your superiors that you mean business. You are a good hard worker. And the better the work that you get, the more skilled you're going to be. Right? So everyone wants to work with that go-getter that's going to get their work done. And so in that sense, yeah, I do think that early on you do have to grin and bear it if you have certain goals in mind. And again, it's not about putting in, the time or paying your dues. It's about getting that experience. And the only way you're going to get the experience is by showing up and doing things that you don't want to do and probably working with people you don't want to work with so that you do have the ability to make those choices and be picky. Now, that said, I do want to give you an example and an exception. If you know that you want to start your own firm, or you know you want to do something entrepreneurial or different, then don't grin and bear it. You're going to be miserable and it's not going to accomplish anything. Who cares what your resume says or shows if you don't need it for the next step of your life? So an example that I was thinking of when I was thinking through your question is Rachel Rogers. She is an attorney, and she was not practicing very long at all before she went out and started her own law firm, and she did it in an online business format. And, she shares her numbers. So she's killing it. She's making 7 figures, and she would not be in that role today. She would not have been able to probably make that happen. I think she would tell you this, in a traditional law firm. And so her exiting out early, even though everyone was saying you don't even have the skills or experience to be starting your own firm, you have lost your mind. She just said, this is what I want to do. And those are your fears, not mine. So I'm going to go do it anyway. And she's absolutely paved her own path, done her own thing, and she's doing awesome and helping a ton of people. So it really matters most what you want, right? So if you want to be a partner in a firm, a big firm, if you want to be that GC, if you want to be at the top within a traditional model, absolutely, to some extent, you're going to have to grin and bear it. On the other hand, if you want to do something completely non-traditional and pave your own way, especially if it's your own firm or your own company, you don't need to grin and bear it at all. The first few years of experience you're going to get is not really going to probably matter. Okay? Now, something that's related to both of those questions, related to alignment with career goals, and then how picky can you be, should you grin and bear it? And it also is going to move into the next one we're going to do related to how often can you move jobs or change jobs. You need to be doing yearly checkups. So here's the thing. What you want now may not be what you want later. What you want now absolutely might be what you want later. But the only way to know that for certain is if you are regularly checking in and being honest with yourself. So this is why I think so many attorneys get frustrated and bored and start to experience burnout, is because it's really hard being a lawyer. We work a lot of hours, and so it's so easy to just get bogged down in the day-to-day that you never stop and think about, is this what I still want? What do I want long term? So you are young enough that this is the perfect time to start implementing this habit in your life. It's going to make so much of a difference in your career, and that is to do a yearly checkup. December generally makes sense. Some people do it in January. My entire concept of the life and law blueprint, it's my 7-step system. Number 2 is clarity. Number 3 is inventory. And this is something that you're always looking at. Every single year, these are all important. So you want to know clarity. Where are you going? What do you want? What do you want? Where are you going? And number 3 is the inventory piece, comparing where you are now to where you want to go, so you can be honest with yourself about, are you on the right path and what needs to change? You can go to my main website, which is heatherjoyhubbard.com/blueprint. It's an ebook. It's written in a conversational fashion, but it's the 7 steps. So you can grab that for free if you want it, but I highly encourage you to go ahead and start doing this on an annual basis so that you can stay intentional and never find a place where you have basically drifted and you're in a job or a career that you no longer want. You were just waking up and going to work every day and then found yourself stuck. So always be intentional. So that then moves into the next part of the question about how often can you move jobs. That, changes. So I'm going to tell you where we are right now. You've got a long career ahead of you, so I can't predict where it's going, but I can tell you what it looks like now. So used to, it was a really big deal if you moved around a lot. So if you went from job to job to job, an employer would look at that and assume that, 1, you're not going to be committed, you're not going to stay long term, or 2, you must have some kind of fatal flaw. That is not as big of a deal as it used to be. Now, there are going to be some baby boomers that are totally going to look at that and think that you're not loyal. just because that's their generation. It's not right or wrong. We just grew up in different ways. They're very loyal generally to employers and their careers. Gen Xers and millennials are much more likely to move around and do their own thing. And right now, the market is that the way to truly advance in most firms, and to some degree in companies as well, is to be an outsider coming in. Because sometimes you just look better, right? Like they don't know any of your warts. And you might look like the complete package to fit a very specific thing. So lateraling is huge. And now it's a bit different for associates and partners. But when you're an associate and you are making lateral moves, firms are generally looking for a very specific type of background and expertise. A lot of times that's how companies are as well. This is why it's super important to pick the right niche or specialty to begin with, because it will impact your career going forward if you want to stay on the same trajectory. But the key thing is the companies, the firms, they're just trying to fill a need. So again, everybody's just trying to get the work done. And generally when an opening comes up, it's because someone left and they need to get it filled, right? And so they want a hard worker. They want an overachiever, which you've already said you're both of, so that's a win-win. They're not going to care so much about how much you've been moving around. And given the terrible retention at law firms, they're looking less at those numbers as to what is the cost of losing someone. Honestly, this is going to sound terrible. They don't expect you to stay for the long term anyway. They're just looking to fill an immediate need. For the most part, there are exceptions. So I think it's actually okay to move around. Here's the thing I want you to pay attention to, though. When you get into a job and you think it's the wrong job for you, I don't want you to just start looking for another job. I want you to pay attention to what it is that's not working. The key is to learn and grow with each move and make sure that you are owning your part so that you don't take it with you when you go. So many people that move around from job to job to job, it's because of something that they're taking with them. And because you might be leaving behind an environment or a culture or certain people, you're still going, right? Your issues are still going with you to the next job. And they often present themselves over and over and over again. So before you move, I just want you to be very clear about what it is that's not working so that you can, one, try to avoid that at the next job, but two, own your part. So for example, if you don't really like working with a specific person, obviously you're going to think, well, that's about them. But maybe the issue is that you have a hard time speaking up, or you don't do well with people when there's a conflict, right? So those are issues that you can work through to make sure that you don't end up in that situation again. But that said, I think if you need to move somewhere in less than a year, you can maybe do that once. I would not make that a regular habit. I think 1 to 2 years at a place looks okay. Again, if you're doing that every single year, that might look bad. But otherwise, if you're spending a few years here and there, I think that's absolutely okay in the current marketplace. Others may disagree with me, but that's what I am seeing. Okay, quickly, very, very quickly, this won't take much time. The very last part of your question. If a place does not value you as an overachiever or as a hard worker and an overachiever, how can you convince them to do so, to appreciate you? Okay, that is a losing battle. So I want you to give up on that concept right now. You need to own your worth and know your worth. And if others don't value that, then you move on to the next job. Owning and knowing your worth and finding people that do appreciate and understand that is a far better approach than trying to convince someone else over whom you have no control that they should value you. Okay? This is a life lesson in general. I get that if you are, I'm not really sure the context of that, but if you're in, let's say, a clerkship or something else where maybe it's not appreciated the way it would be at a company or a firm, obviously you're not going to go ahead and leave. That said, I would not waste a single minute of time or energy trying to convince someone that they should appreciate you. Instead, I would look for other outlets. I would look for bar organizations. If you're thinking you don't want to stay in the same city, look at something that's national. Find ways to get involved with your community or your board and start letting them see that you are a hard worker and an overachiever, and that will 100% pay dividends because people will very much appreciate your help, and that might even help you with connections on your next job. So yeah, I wouldn't try to convince them of that. Just look for the type of place that is going to appreciate it, and you can start looking at other outlets to leverage those qualities. All right, that is it. I hope that has been helpful, Marie. And for everyone else listening, I hope you have gotten something out of that as well. If you would like your question answered, be sure to fill out the survey. You can go to hustleandflowpodcast.com/survey. And we will put that in the show notes as well. You just answer some questions. Let me know that you have an idea for an upcoming episode, and you can put your name or not. And I love getting these questions. I hope that you find them helpful. So go to the survey and fill it out if you would like me to consider your question for next month's podcast Q&A. All right. Have a great day, everyone. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.